Hello guys, we're going to do section 37.2 today, which is going to cover how non-specific defenses function. So they're talking about things that aren't just targeting a particular pathogen, okay? So non-specific defenses. The skin and mucous membranes form non-specific external barriers to invasion. So we talked about on Tuesday how skin and other types of membranes, they're not focusing on a particular type of pathogen, just anything that comes in contact with it. Its job is to try to keep it out. So the skin's doing that by secretions, and harmless microbes reduce invasion by pathogens. So it's using its own secretion and some other living microbes that are on your skin or other openings of your bodies to try to keep that stuff out. So your skin, okay, the outer surface of human skin consists of dry, dead cells filled with proteins similar to those in hair and nails. So your outer layer of skin is dead cells. It's not living cells, okay? You have to get into it a little bit before you hit live cells. It's protected by secretions from sweat glands and sebaceous, which are oil glands. We'll see a picture on the next slide of what this looks like. The skin also hosts several microbial ecosystems, including on your face. So on your scalp and on your face, there's some stuff that helps to prevent those pathogens from getting inside of your skin. Moist sites, so like between your toes or your armpits, there's certain bacteria that live there that can help prevent pathogens from going in. And dry sites, so pretty much everywhere else. There's ecosystems on your body to help prevent some of this stuff getting in. And these microbes often produce secretions that inhibit the growth of pathogenic microbes. So, right. So, for instance, the bacteria that are in your armpit might be producing a particular type of oil that prevents anything from starting to other stuff from starting to grow there. Harmful pathogens regularly come in contact with your body, but these pathogens rarely make it through unbroken skin into tissues below. So, just that outer layer naturally by itself does a pretty good job of keeping stuff out. So here's a picture of what your skin actually looks like. So this upper layer, the outer layer, what you see is called the epidermis. And underneath that you have the dermis and this subcutaneous layer, which is underneath that, which is where all your blood vessels are. So if you ever cut through your skin where it starts bleeding, you've gotten down to the subcutaneous layer here. You can see what a hair kind of looks like, hair follicle. You have sweat glands in the dermis here. You've got nerves in the dermis as well. And these glands are these sweat glands are going to allow that to leave via the hair and reach that outer layer. So all this stuff here is trying to keep stuff out, right? We're trying to prevent pathogens from getting into this system. So that's what it looks like. Okay, so mucus, antibacterial proteins, and ciliary actions defend mucous membranes against microbes. So this is talking about, if you remember this word from first semester, cilia. There was cilia and flagella. Flagella were the long tails. Cilia were the little tails that were on the outside of bacteria and other types of things. The little cilia, those are actually going to be helpful for preventing stuff from getting into your body. So mucous membranes secrete mucus that traps microbes entering the nose or mouth. Mucus also contains antibacterial proteins, including something called a lysozyme, which, if you remember, anything that ends in "-ime", those are usually proteins, but these are coming from getting produced by, you might remember, lysosomes from first semester as well, which kill bacteria by digesting their walls, and a protein called defensin, which makes holes in bacterial plasma membranes. So that stuff from first semester, lysozymes, they also produce stuff that helps break some of this other stuff down. So you get a protein called lysozyme and defensin, which can also break these things down. And then that's happening inside of your mucus layers, okay? And then what are the cilia used for? They're on the membranes. They sweep up the mucus, now with the microbes on it, until it is either coughed or sneezed out of the body, or it is swallowed. So, right, this is an example of like the cilia that would be up in your nose. And if you get bacteria that go up in there, it gets trapped along these tiny little cilia, preventing it from going all the way, okay, inside of you, until you either blow it out, cough it out, sneeze it out, whatever it might be. It prevents it from getting any further inside of you. So that's kind of how that works there. So continuing on with what we were talking about just a minute ago, swallowed microbes go into your stomach. So if they manage to get through that outer layer there and you swallow it, it goes to your stomach, where you're going to encounter more protein digesting enzymes that are going to break stuff down, and extreme acidity, both of which are pretty lethal. So if it's made it that far, a lot of stuff dies at this point. Bacteria in the intestines secrete substances that destroy invading bacteria or fungi. So if it makes it past the stomach, there's still stuff in the intestines that's designed to break this down. And then where does it go when it's breaking this stuff down? Fluids expelled by the body, including tears, urine, diarrhea, and vomit, help expel invaders. So when you get sick and these sort of things are happening, what's actually happening is it's your body's attempt to try to rid itself of the invaders, okay? That's what's going on there. So, the innate immune response non-specifically combats invading microbes. So now we're talking about not external barriers, but internal stuff that's going to work, and that was called the innate immune response. Innate means it just naturally happens. It's not going to target a specific pathogen. Pathogens can penetrate external barriers through openings such as cuts in the skin. They can still make it through your nose, mouth, okay, other openings. It's possible that that is the case. Once inside, they encounter 3 types of innate immune responses. So if they make it through the external barriers, they're either going to run into white blood cells, okay, the inflammatory response by your immune system, and fever. So these 3 things, okay, are called the innate immune response. This is all internal, and it's non-specific. It just happens if something gets in and starts to take over. So you got white blood cells, inflammatory response, and fever. Okay, so we're going to kind of break these down starting with the white blood cells. We have 2 types here that we're going to talk about: phagocytes and natural killer cells, which you will see abbreviated NKCs, which destroy invading microbes. Okay, over here you have a picture of kind of what this looks like. I think these ones are phagocytes. Maybe they're natural killer cells. I can't remember. But you got a picture of them. These are red blood cells in the background, so you can see kind of the relative size difference there. These small little pieces, those are probably bacteria or other pathogens that these cells are trying to go in and destroy. But so at any given point, your body has a standing army of white blood cells, which we call leukocytes. Okay, that's the official biological name for this, is leukocytes. They're ready to go. Okay, that doesn't mean they're always working. They're a standing army. They're waiting for something to come in and try to invade. Many of these are specialized to attack and destroy invading cells. The first one we have listed here are called phagocytes. They ingest invaders by phagocytosis, which you might remember from first semester. That was cell eating, yeah? Okay, where it engulfs the cells around it, all right? We have 3 types of phagocytes. We have macrophages, neutrophils, and dendritic cells. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of umbrella categories here. So you have leukocytes. Underneath that, we have phagocytes. Underneath phagocytes, we have macrophages, neutrophils, and dendritic cells. And then we'll also have a separate category for natural killer cells here in a minute. Okay, so what do these cells do? Macrophages, neutrophils, and dendritic cells travel within the bloodstreams. They're going around in your blood vessels and capillaries and ooze out through capillary walls and patrol the body's tissue. Okay, so if you get an open wound or a cut that cuts through, like, say, a capillary here, your macrophage is going to exit that and start looking for pathogens that come in. Okay, it's not looking for anything in particular, right? It's not specific to a particular virus or bacteria. It's just going to go try to kill anything that it finds that's not natural. Okay, there they consume bacteria, foreign pathogens that have penetrated the skin or mucous membranes. So you can also see here like a macrophage stuffed with bacteria that it's ingested. So here it is, having eaten all this stuff, and then it's going to break that down. Okay, so we just finished talking about phagocytes with 3 types there. Here we're going to look at natural killer cells, NKCs. So nonspecific defense against viruses is the job of another type of leukocyte called NKCs. So when viruses enter the body cells and use the cell's own metabolism and reproductive organelles to manufacture more viruses, that's how it spreads, right? It uses the cell's own proteins to make more viruses, and then it kills the cell, releasing a bunch of more viruses. Well, natural killer cells are different than phagocytes. They don't go and eat these cells up. What they do instead is that their job is to kill the virus-infected cells before they start breaking open and releasing a bunch of new viruses. So Killing infected cells before the viruses have had enough time to reproduce and to spread other cells can stop viral infections before they damage the body as a whole. So these things, basically, they see a cell's getting sick, they realize that it's malfunctioning and making viruses, and it responds by going to kill them before they release a bunch of viruses. These are not phagocytic cells. Instead, they release proteins that bore holes in the membranes of the infected cells and secrete enzymes through the holes, and the attacked cells die. Okay, so they're not engulfing them and eating them. Instead, it just kind of poisons them and prevents them from making more viruses. So there's one right there for you to see what that looks like. So an important question that I mentioned on Tuesday was, how do these cells know whether something is part of the body itself or if it's something from outside of that? So it should say, I don't know why it says DO. How do natural killer cells distinguish virus-infected cells, which are the ones that need to be killed, from healthy cells that need to be spared? The surfaces of normal body cells display a set of proteins, right? These you might remember from first semester, cell surface proteins, cell surface markers. But here, what they're looking for in particular is a set of cell surface proteins called MHCs, which stands for major histocompatibility complexes. That's what it's checking to see. And if it belongs to your body, it'll recognize your MHCs versus something that's not. So it's looking on the outside of cells. There's little markers that tell it whether it's the right thing or not. So MHC proteins differ between species and between even individuals within a species. So every human has a different set of MHCs. Okay, unless you have like an identical twin or something like that, right? Then you'll have different MHCs, which identify it as self. Okay, so those markers on the cell surface tell your immune system, hey, this belongs to you, don't attack this. Natural killer cells patrol the body and kill any non-self cells that they encounter, sparing self cells. And so we noticed that natural killer cells, what they did is they didn't go engulfing these cells. They went near them, your healthy, well, formerly healthy, but now infected cells, and released basically toxins that destroyed it. Well, how do they know that they're bad? Well, infected cells often lack some MHC proteins, so they look like non-self cells to NKCs. Okay, so when they get infected, your body cells start losing some of the correct MHC markers, major histocompatibility markers, which means your natural killer cells stop recognizing it as self and see it as non-self, and they go to attack them. Another cool function of NKCs is that they will target tumor cells. And the reason is that most cancerous or tumor cells have missing or altered MHC proteins, so the markers around the outside of it aren't quite correct. They're identified as non-self cells by natural killer cells and destroyed in the same way as virus-infected cells. So your body does have some way to try to deal with cancerous cells. Obviously, people still get cancer. This is not a perfect system. You can still get overrun with tumor cells. Not every tumor cell is going to have as many errors on the MHC markers, so they may blend in for a little bit longer. But these natural killer cells can actually target tumor cells as well, which is kind of another cool side note. Okay, so we talked about phagocytes, we talked about natural killer cells, right, as an innate response. That was part one. So part two of the innate response is the inflammatory response. And so it's going to attract phagocytes to injured or infected tissue. So if you ever heard somebody talk about inflammation, or doctors talk about inflammation, or if you've ever broken something, twisted something, got a really bad cut or burn, you'll talk about the inflammation really hurts or it's really bad. So what actually is going on there with inflammation? A wound provokes what's called an inflammatory response, which I should say recruits, okay, phagocytes to the site of injury and walls off the injured area, isolating the infected tissue from the rest of the body. So basically just creates a barrier and makes sure that the wound is contained, that it's nothing else can get in from that and try to get around it, and just walls it off. So the inflammatory response causes injured tissue to become warm, red, swollen, and painful. Okay, if you've ever gotten like a blister from anything, you'll know exactly what that's like. If you've ever burned yourself, get inflammatory response, major cuts, major twists, things like that, it hurts. So an open wound that allows bacteria to enter will receive an inflammatory response from the immune system. That's how it prevents it from getting any further in than, say, that initial opening wound. Damaged cells release chemicals that cause certain cells in the connective tissue called mast cells to release histamine and other chemicals. We might get into histamines a little bit more later. There's a whole class of drugs called antihistamines, which are designed to reduce inflammation. You've got a lot of allergy medications that are antihistamines. So go ahead and Google what antihistamines are. There's a whole bunch of them that you'll probably recognize. But that stops the release of histamine. Histamine is trying to create this inflammatory response. Okay, so histamine, what it does is it relaxes the smooth muscle surrounding the arterioles, which increase blood flow. So this is like the smooth muscle in here. Histamine is going to relax it, which is going to allow more blood flow in, and it makes the capillary walls leaky, so stuff can leave the capillary here. Phagocytes can get into the infected area. All right, that's what it does. So histamine is going to soften up this tissue, allow for more blood flow, get those phagocytes, and it's going to open up some holes in the capillary walls, the arterial walls, and allow those phagocytes to come over and try to make sure that any bacteria coming in from that wound is going to be killed. Okay, so why does this result in like pain and inflammation? What does that actually do? Well, this extra blood flow through this leaky capillary, okay, that's what's painful. That's why it turns red. It turns red because you're getting extra blood flow to the area. It's also causing warmth. As this tissue is told to soften up, it warms up. You also have more blood flowing to this area, which gets it warm. It also swells up as well. And so that's what's going on here when you have this inflammation from these open wounds. So you're getting poked by some kind of, like, I don't know, pin or something. Your body's going to respond by releasing histamine. The histamine is going to relax this smooth muscle here. Mast cells in the area are going to release that histamine. Okay, histamine is going to allow the red blood cells to flow through here. Blood's going to flow through here. Phagocytes are going to come through here. There's going to be openings in your capillaries and arterioles, which are going to allow them to then attack any bacteria that might be coming off of this thing. There are other chemicals other than histamine that's going to be released, and some of those chemicals, what they're going to do is initiate blood clotting. So after you've had this initial response to try to get some phagocytes and other white blood cells in there, you're going to then have chemicals released that are going to let the blood clot, which prevents you from bleeding out. Okay, it's going to slow down bleeding. So once you've had this initial response, you're going to get some blood clotting. So clots plug up damaged blood vessels, including blood loss, preventing microbes from entering the bloodstream. So let's say that pin from the previous picture had penetrated all the way through to a blood vessel. You're going to get clots forming. Okay, it's going to make sure that you stop bleeding and prevent anything that was in there from getting into the bloodstream. Sepsis is a pretty nasty disease to get, which is a blood-borne illness. So you don't want stuff getting into your blood, and this is how it stops doing that. So blood will clot up. Okay, the last part of our innate immune response is fever. So part 1 was your white blood cells going to go attack these things. Part 2 is the inflammatory response. Part 3 is fever, which is going to help combat large-scale infections. So if you have a fever, what your body's fighting something off. We'll talk about why it does that. So if an invader survives all these initial defenses and causes a serious infection, it might trigger a fever, and it probably will, which does a couple things. It slows down microbial reproduction and enhances the body's own fighting abilities. So fever is controlled by hypothalamus, which is part of your brain. It's the part of the brain that's actually responsible for keeping your temperature consistent, right? Homeostasis, yeah? All the way back from the very first section we did this year. Hypothalamus is responsible for keeping your temperature throughout the body the same. So the average human temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, a chemical called pyrogens are released, which raises the thermostat set point. So let's say you get one of these infections. What your body is going to do, okay, is it is going to release this chemical, which is going to say, okay, let's raise the point it should be at from 98.6 to something else, right? It's going to go up to, say, 99.6, and if that's not enough, it'll go up to 100.6, and if that's not enough, 101.6. It's going to keep going up until it thinks it's got enough of a response to whatever this threat is. Well, this is good, except if this just keeps going up, if you have no way of slowing this down and you end up with fevers of like 103, 104, 105 degrees, that gets really serious really quick. Okay, it's good initially, but if this gets uncontrolled, that means you got a serious infection. Your body can't stop it, and it's running away with a fever. And if you get anywhere really above like 103, 104 degrees, you should be getting some medical help pretty quickly. But what does this actually do? What does the fever do? The body responds by increasing fat metabolism. So how does it actually increase your temperature? Well, it starts burning some of your fat reserves. That's why people that have fevers or get sick for several weeks or like have the flu or pneumonia, they generally lose a lot of weight. One, they're not eating a whole lot, but two, their body starts burning a lot of fat to try to raise their temperature to combat this stuff. Okay, it constricts blood vessels supplying the skin and increases behaviors such as shivering. So it's going to reduce heat loss through the skin by constricting these blood vessels, so your body maintains heat a little bit better. And it's going to increase behaviors like shivering, which actually raises your temperature. Okay, so that's what it does. So how do those things combat infection? It increases the activity of phagocytic white blood cells while simultaneously slowing down reproduction in some types of bacteria. So these phagocytes, they are going to increase their workload. Okay, they know, all right, temperature's up, that means I got to go do more work. It also leads to iron deficiency in the blood, which slows down bacterial reproduction. They need iron to do that. It stimulates production of a protein called interferon in infected cells, which travels to other cells and increases their resistance to viral attack. So this is only for viruses, but if you get a viral infection, those cells are going to release interferon, which tells everybody else, hey, guess what, I'm getting attacked. Everybody else be aware. And higher temperatures cause the malfunction of proteins. They unfold. So you get this denaturing. You guys remember that term from first semester? Hopefully you do. Denaturing of proteins. You're heating them up and they unfold. So these bacterial proteins stop working because they unfold. This is good to stop pathogen reproduction, but the problem can become prolonged fever can significantly harm the rest of the body. Their proteins are affected as well. So like if you've got 104-degree fever and you have it for quite a while, that can get really problematic. Yes, you're doing a good job of preventing the bacteria or whatever from reproducing. The problem is your cells can't keep functioning at that temperature for prolonged periods of time. So if you ever get long fevers, you should definitely get some help or start taking stuff like Tylenol, which helps bring your fever down. And then lastly, just kind of bringing it back to where we started on Tuesday when we were talking about Jim Henson and how he died from strep, basically an extreme strep throat. So how does stuff like break through all of this? How do we get these like really bad infections, things like strep throat, or like in what we're dealing with right now, COVID-19? How does this stuff get through all of these external barriers? Well, some bacteria are surrounded by a polysaccharide capsule that basically tricks phagocytic cells to not realize that it doesn't belong. It's going to trick those cells to think these should be within the body. So the phagocytes don't attack those bacteria, and so if they don't, and those things are allowed to grow and not recognized as being foreign, what happens then? And so that's what we'll talk about starting at the beginning of next week with the adaptive immune response. So how do we start targeting very specific things?